the skeleton of this giant in Ecuador is actually in the museum in Ecuador. Here it is, a 7-meter giant in a museum in Ecuador. We're dealing with real history of this planet that's been removed from us. What the freaking hell is going on here? And when the gods were on earth, there were giants. And this is a very important part of our history, our reality that we have to deal with. Somebody went to a lot of trouble to show these. It's a great little illustration of real giant discoveries. This is not somebody's theory. These are real ancient discoveries. We're extreme left, 6 feet tall there. That's a little guy there. That's us. But this is nothing compared to the real giants. The Jewish Encyclopedia talks about the giants and the Anakim are the same titanic race as the Rephaim, the Nephilim, the Gibborim, the Zamzumim, and the Emim. And the giants were between, it also tells us in the book of Enoch that the giants were between 300 and 3,000 ells tall. I'll talk more about that. That actually ranges from 130 meters to 1.5 kilometers tall. 1.5 kilometers, that's almost a mile tall. Okay, so rethink everything. If you've not contemplated this size before, start thinking about this. We're dealing with real history of this planet that's been removed from us, removed from our system, removed from our memories. This is part of it. So when we look at the Boskop skull, 20% larger than we are, and this is the Boskop skull on the left, found in South Africa as well. This is nothing. The bone of the giant found in Namibia that is at Wits University in Johannesburg, that's nothing. These guys may have been twice the size of us. And it gets more interesting. This footprint in China gets a little bit more interesting. But obviously the most beautiful footprint of a giant in a rock must be in South Africa, and it is. There it is. And you'll go and see this when you come on one of our trips, a Sacred Sites tour, on one of the shorter trips that I'm putting together now, because I'm going to spend a lot more energy and focus on this in the coming months and years. This is a spectacular story about this, and Klaus Donner found in Ecuador a nose bone, a heel bone, and a skull fragment that was genetically tested in Vienna and proved to be humanoid and giant. And the skeleton of this giant in Ecuador is actually in the museum in Ecuador. Here it is. It's been reconstructed and it's actually in the museum. You can go and see it. A 7-meter giant in a museum in Ecuador. These were just small giants, because when you read Leviticus, it says that we were like locusts by their side. And in the book of Enoch, it says the giants were 3,000 ells tall. 1 ell is about just less than half a meter. That means it would make the giants 1.5 kilometers or just less than 1 mile tall. And some of you may have seen the new discoveries of the giant trees that we seem to have lost around the world that were somehow chopped down. I now believe that many of those trees were accompanied by giants as well, and we have lots of remains of giants. This might be a real giant heart of a giant 150 meters tall. And it just so happens that this, what I recently only saw as a rock that was strategically placed just beneath that giant footprint. This is a rock that's like a marker stone that's been placed there, very strategically, put upright and propped up with other rocks. And you see that little round thing there? That could be where the aorta came in. You can even see the little thing moving away from it. When you start looking at mud fossils and fossilized bones, things change quite dramatically. It's a complete metamorphosis and a change in mineralogy that happens during mud fossilization. It is a subject that not too many people know too much about. So I'm thinking, and we have some channelings and some shamanic readings and so forth that suggest that the Anunnaki may have been following the route of the giants and actually mining the leftovers and the remains, fossilized remains of the giants, and extracting the gold from the fossilized remains of the giants that were 1 mile tall, knowing that there'd be concentration of gold, especially in their feet, from the knees down. Especially if the giant died while it was standing up, then the gold would then filter down into the lower parts of the limbs.
Having explored the references to giants in ancient texts, we now turn to the fascinating evidence found in the stone circles of South Africa. These ancient structures not only reveal advanced energy technologies, but also provide tangible proof of the giants themselves through fossilized body parts embedded in the landscape.
It's obviously cymatics that we're dealing with. If you look at the stone circles from the air, by now you should realize that we're dealing with cymatics, or the shape of sound. Cymatic patterns from the earth. Every stone circle is simply a representation of the sound that comes out of the earth at that specific point. Very cleverly using the resonance and the subtle sound frequencies of Mother Earth and converting that into magnetic fields, into moving magnetic fields, electromagnetic fields, and electricity. And here we have a simple progression of creation: sound, magnetism, electromagnetics, and electricity. And from there, we realize that we're dealing with a giant energy grid, all connected, all the stone circles, and that's what this giant stone circle cluster in South Africa, Southern Africa, is all about. A giant energy grid, and it's still alive today. Some of them are built in the shape of magnetrons, these beautiful flower shapes that would give us insane amounts of energy. 2 magnetron scientists told me independently that one of these 40-meter diameter magnetrons built out of quartz would give us more energy than all the power plants on Earth combined today. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm not a magnetron scientist, but that's what they told me. And when you realize how powerful a tiny magnetron is, and a magnetron this size can cut metal in a split second, imagine how much energy a magnetron 40 meters in diameter can generate. And we measured these stone circles, we measured their frequencies. I'm not going to dwell on this because you've probably seen this before, but we measure in the gigahertz, very powerful electromagnetic fields in the very high megahertz as well, and also very powerful decibels, the power, the energy of the sound frequencies that we measured in the big stone circles that run into 30,000 decibels. This is an incredibly powerful tool. It's like a weapon. On Adam's calendar's measurements that just go through the roof. There we go, beyond 375 gigahertz. The sound that's connected to the mysterious stone tools and artifacts that I've been collecting for 11 years now. And like I said, the phallus stones are just spectacular. You can see this one and several others in my museum. This one, however, is a bit too big to carry. This comes from near Adam's calendar as well. Just like the stone man was removed from Adam's calendar, this giant phallus was also removed from close to Adam's calendar and put up at the forestry office. And then these, take a good look. Is this possibly a real phallus of a giant 150 meters tall? And the bird stones, I've already shown you the bird stones and the Zimbabwe birds and how this is all connected. The other mysteries are the cone-shaped tools. Again, Sunday I go into the science of the cone-shaped tools and cone-shaped technology in modern science and modern aeronautics today. This is just, you can't make this stuff up. These two, by the way, these two are not cone-shaped tools, because now I can see exactly what they are. That thing that I'm holding in my hand and the one on the right, those are fossils. Those are not cone-shaped tools. You'll see when we look at the fossils, you'll start to recognize and distinguish between the tools and the fossils. Once your eyes are open, you can never go back. Once I was blind, but now I can see it very clearly. And then the very important donut-shaped stones, or the Taurus stones, that play such an important role in pretty much all the science and all of creation, combined with a cone-shaped technology. More than 100,000 sacred stones, or donut-shaped stones, or Taurus stones, at least. They just cover all of Southern Africa. And remember, our modern archaeologists still refer to them as weights for digging sticks. I'm not kidding you. They still do this. It's just laughable. So when you combine the toroidal stones, very powerful energy generating devices, with the cone-shaped tools, you have a powerful combination to create and project, manifest and use sound and Caesar beam technology. I want to remind you that the stones ring like bells. These are now in my museum. There are hundreds of them, and I know where there are thousands and thousands more. Literally mountains covered in fossilized body parts. This is the spectacular thing. I've been walking on these stones for 12 years, wondering, why are these stones this weird shape? This is probably the most beautiful fossil that I found, and that is a heart. As you can see the coronal artery right across it. So we have teeth, hearts, ribs, claws, etc. Just to give you an idea. Some of the early pictures, first coming down the mountain. Here's a shoulder blade, or that part of the shoulder. I mean, that is like 10 times the size of a human shoulder blade. Here is a large bone, part of a bone knuckle. Here you can see my foot next to it, just to give you the idea of the size. The shaft would have gone out to the left of that bone. Which bone that is, I don't know. And then this, I mean, when I first saw this, I was up the mountain with Emma and we saw this and we laughed. We said, wow, that looks just like a shoe or a foot. And we just ignored it. This was like 6 or 12 months before we realized that we're dealing with mud fossils. So we just left it lying there. We went back and went, oh my God, this is most likely somebody's foot. But it looks like it's in a shoe. It's like, what's going on here? And it's broken off around the ankle or just above the ankle. There's another angle. So this is mysterious stuff, people. Clearly that is not a stone, it's a bone. And in fact, those 3, you can see my feet at the top of that picture, so you can get a size. And all those lying next to each other, those are just bones and meat attached to it. The fascinating thing is that the fossilization process of these mud fossils takes these body parts, and this is why this is going to become an important study in geology, because they don't know this, and metallurgy. It completely transmutates into Hornfels rock, metamorphosized quartzite. You can hardly see the internal organs. Some of them that have broken, you can vaguely see stuff going on inside, but pretty much it just converts everything into Hornfels rock that rings like a bell. So many of the stone circles are actually made up of fossilized body parts. So the question is, what the hell is going on here? What the freaking hell is going on here? This is a piece of a spine, that part at the top, that weird thing, I forget what it's called now. Here's a beautiful, the best example of a rib. The picture on the right shows you where it was attached to the rib cage. This is another picture of 3 ribs. Here is jawbone. This is a piece of a jawbone. This part of the jawbone that goes up there. And except this is like this size. So, the head would have been this size. I don't know what this is, but we'll figure out what that is. This is another picture of that bone, and there below it is a claw. This is a claw from some animal, some creature. And this is one of my favorites. This is a hoof of a weird extinct creature. You can see on the top there where the bone would have come into the hoof, attached to it. This is another angle. See where the bone would have been attached to it. And this is just a group shot of fossilized body parts. There you can also see that jawbone piece there, second from the top left. And these are really fossilized chunks of meat with the skin attached to it still. Here's a close-up of the reptilian skin. Here's a beautiful example of how the reptilian skin has fossilized below the skin. Can you see those layers that grow towards the skin and then they become the skin, the complete fossilization? It becomes Hornfels rock. This is unknown in metallurgy or unknown in geology. This complete metamorphosis into rock. I don't know what this is, but this is an interesting piece that needs studying. And this is just a beautiful piece, because this is a chunk of meat that somebody was busy eating or clawing. You can see the teeth or claw marks in the steak with the flesh still on the outside. So I'd like to give you a little glimpse of some of the fossils that I've been collecting since January 2018. It is truly remarkable. Here we have, I'm just going to give you a short rundown of the display in the museum. Firstly, what we believed to be just ringing stones that ring like bells, are actually fossils and body parts. These are not just normal stones. I will go into great detail about the discovery, the significance, the kind of stone, and the metamorphosis that happens. Obviously, the Taurus stones like these are not part of the fossils. The Taurus stones are something very different and very unique and very important. But pretty much the rest of the stones that you see here are actually mud fossils of different body parts that just need to be investigated much more greatly and much more deeply. Here we have a shoulder blade or part of the shoulder, other body parts. You can clearly see these are bones that are fossilized. We have what looks to be like a coccyx over there. We have teeth. We have a heart. This is the big heart, the main heart that we've discovered. We have possibly dinosaur eggs. There's a claw, there's some teeth, and there's ribs, there's kidneys, and this over here seems to be part of a vertebrae, a backbone. And then we have ribs, very important ribs, and other body parts. Here you can see, for example, that's where the tendons over here, that's where the tendons would connect to whichever part of the body this is. Here also you have, there's where the tendons would connect in this area. And when you look this side, you start getting an idea of what's going on. These are not stones, these are actual body parts. What's interesting about the ribs is that this rib, for example, it looks like somebody cut it with a knife. So a lot more to be said about this. Here you can see where it was connected to the rest of the skeleton, and this here is probably by far the best rib that we've got, this long thin one. Here you can see where it was connected to the rib cage down here, and so much more. There is another rib there by the looks of it, and that is clearly a bone that is fossilized. You can see that's a beauty. And here we have very strange hoof of a creature, a claw or a hoof of a creature that is now extinct. This is where the leg bone would have come in, and the hoof actually would have stood up like this. The animal would have stood on the hoof like that. I recently noticed that my Wonderstone that cracked and broke some 11 years ago when I first put it into the museum into several pieces has developed a new crack. And this is a very significant new event here in the Stone Circle Museum. That's what remains of the original Wonderstone. These are known as the Klerksdorp spheres. They're mysterious stones that are billions of years old, and many people believe that they're actually made by intelligent beings, that they're not natural formations. And this is a huge breakthrough observation, because this stone that was given to me as a gift for the museum in early 2008, after about 6 months of me placing it in the museum, cracked and started developing a big crack, and eventually after several months just split into two, and then it continued breaking and splitting more and more. Eventually ended up in these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces, and a few smaller ones. And it's been like this for at least 10 years now. And then suddenly I noticed the other day when I had a tour group in here that the large piece has just developed a new crack. And this is a huge new, I guess, discovery. And I'm not sure what the stuff is that's growing on this. This is part of the ongoing research and investigation that has to happen here. But this Wonderstone has now developed a new crack, and that piece there eventually will break into two, and who knows if it continues breaking into more pieces. That dark spot in the middle is the center piece of this stone, this Wonderstone, or the Klerksdorp sphere as they are known. And this is a huge significant event, and I will go into deep explanation why this happened, because now I finally have irrefutable probability, statistical argument, I guess, if I can put it that way, why the stone broke and why it suddenly started to crack again. So let me finish the story. And the story is that when I met Credo Mutwa, I asked him about the Klerksdorp spheres. And I said, what were these? And he said they were ancient sources of light. They were used like light bulbs. They were very sensitive to frequency, and at a specific frequency they would just become light, give off light. And I thought, Credo, you lost your mind, that's sorry dude, man. So guess what was lying 3 meters away from this Klerksdorp sphere? The Taurus stone that crashed the TSA security system. Since then I removed it, and it's been at my home, because I don't want to bring that into public space, because it could kill people. No, I'm just kidding. But I got gifted, or not gifted, I bought a bunch of Taurus stones from one of the farm laborers on a farm about 100 kilometers away. I went and picked up a whole bunch of these Taurus. See the Taurus stones that were in the middle of the table display? All those ones, and more that I put under the stone that's on display, the Wonderstone. So that Wonderstone had cracked into these 6 pieces, and then I removed the Taurus stone from the museum. I put new Taurus stones close to it, and within a year it developed a new crack. So it is now pretty evident that it was the Taurus stone that crashed the TSA system that caused this Wonderstone to break into many pieces. Now these other new Taurus stones have caused it to start cracking again. This is huge. And this makes me believe that maybe Credo Mutwa was right. That maybe these wonder stones were actually sources of light in ancient times when exposed to subtle frequencies.
One of the greatest archaeological mysteries is the discovery of giant skeletons in 3 western states: California, Arizona, and Nevada. The huge remains found in large stone sarcophagus, caves, and Pueblo burial grounds predate the Native Americans in many cases. Some tribes worshipped men of huge stature who inhabited the region before they arrived. Who were these giants? When did they exist? What happened to them? In 1833, soldiers uncovered a particular level of gravel and stone cement in Lompoc Rancho near Point Conception, California. When the workers broke through it, they were startled to find the skeleton of a 12-foot-long man. This giant had been buried in a massive stone coffin. On closer inspection, the men found that the giant possessed a double row of both upper and lower teeth. Relics buried with the skeleton included several huge stone axes and 2 giant spears. More bones of a giant were excavated on Santa Catalina Island. Accompanying the man were the charred remains of a small species of elephant, which he evidently had roasted. Incidentally, the big guy ate that elephant with a double row of choppers, both upper and lower. But what is the significance of these elephant remains? Remarkably, it suggests that the giant lived there at least 10,000 years ago, the age at which American mammoths became extinct. Elsewhere on Santa Rosa Island, someone found a skeleton of a giant which not only had double rows of teeth, but also artifacts identical to those found at Lompoc Rancho, such as massive stone axes and enormous spears. Similarly, on Santa Cruz Island, another giant skeleton was found. This one was sent to the National Science Foundation in Washington, D.C. However, it was promptly misplaced. Furthermore, at Santa Barbara, a cave full of giant skeletons was found. Unfortunately, the entrance to the cave was sealed shut before proper excavation could be conducted. In 1895, the Chicago Record reported that fossilized remains of men and women who had been 8 to 9 feet tall were found in California. More importantly, their bones were found in the same rock layer as those of extinct mammoths like the bones from Santa Catalina. Earlier in 1891, Crittenden, Arizona, workers were excavating the remains of an old building when they came across an enormous stone sarcophagus at a depth of 8 feet. When archaeologists opened the tomb in front of a large, curious crowd which had gathered, the scientists found a huge mummy case which had been built with blocks of red rose granite. When it was broken open, everyone was disappointed to see only a handful of dust, all that remained of an ancient giant whom the ages had pulverized. Everybody agreed that it had taken a long time for a skeleton to dissolve into dust, particularly in the dry desert. This fact would make the giant much older than the California specimens whose skeletons were found intact. Although not a single bone or artifact was found, the inside of the mummy case had been carved in a likeness of the body, a characteristic reminiscent of Egyptian sarcophagus. According to the carving and the size of the enormous container, the body had once measured 12 feet in length and had 6 toes on each foot. Now the story moves into Nevada, the last state where numerous giant remains have been found. In 1871, Charles Billinger, a writer for the Los Angeles Times, wrote an article in which he described giants found in a cave near Lovelock, Nevada. His article went as follows. In 1812, James Hart and David Push uncovered the first of many giant remains whilst digging manure in the Lovelock Cave. These mummies were red-headed and averaged 6 to 7 feet in height, a slightly shorter version of the 8 to 12 feet footers found elsewhere. Many archaeologists and anthropologists have since come to examine the smoke-stained cave, which is located 22 miles from the town of Lovelock. Attempts to date the remains have resulted in ages ranging from 3000 BC to 1850 AD. The caves were occupied for nearly 500 years, but no artifacts or skeletons except those of the giants have been found. The giants resided in this cave for many centuries until the Puyallup Indians, distressed by the giants' bad habits, annihilated them. What provoked this sudden annihilation? Sarah Winnemucca, a direct descendant of Chief Truckee, the last king of the Paiutes, wrote a book of history and legend of the Paiutes. These stories may help to unravel the mystery. One story claimed that about 100 years before her birth, there was another race sharing the Paiute homeland. This race was called the Sidiokas, which in the Paiute language means man-eaters or cannibals. These giant cannibals had flaming red hair. For sport, they would dig traps in well-traveled trails and wait for some unsuspecting Paiute to fall to his death. Then they would have a grand feast. Needless to say, these actions did not make for friendly relations, and war soon broke out between the two tribes. In the midst of a battle, the giants would leap from behind cover, grab Paiute arrows in mid-flight, and then fire them back at the opposition from their own bows. Unfortunately for the giants, they were greatly outnumbered, so the war did not last long. Later, in an attempt to escape from the Paiutes, the Sidiokas constructed large canoes from tule fibers and lived on Humboldt Lake. When the supplies ran out, they hid in the Lovelock Cave. The Paiutes surrounded the entrance to the cave and killed the giants when they ventured out at night in search of water. This proved to be slow work, so the Paiutes stuffed the cave entrance with wood and set it on fire, thereby smothering all those within and bringing about a quick end to the war. And with that, this tribe of brave, strong and intelligent giants that apparently lived in one region for 5,000 years had been exterminated by the migratory Paiutes in about 1750. During the 3-year war, the entire population of giants were killed, which was estimated by the Paiutes to number 2,600. Annie Bill, a 68-year-old resident of Lovelock and a niece of Sarah Winnemucca, testifies that her grandparents saw the giants and had described them as having long faces and white-skinned. Nowadays, only 300 Paiutes still survive in the Lovelock area. They claim to have always known that remains would be found in the cave. In fact, they were often told white settlers what the cave contained, but of course they were laughed at. After years of ridicule, the Paiute finally kept the knowledge to themselves, at least until they were vindicated by modern science. Other remnants of the giants include relics that have survived, kept by members of the tribe for many years. Winnemucca claimed, "I have some of their hair, which has been handed down from father to son. I have a dress, which has been in our family for many years, trimmed with reddish hair." For further physical evidence, we turn to Stoker's Museum in nearby Winnemucca. The proprietor, Clarence Stoker, a Lovelock native, has participated in several excavations of the cave. His museum is stocked with arrowheads, nets and baskets, in addition to a skull of one of the giants. His prize artifact is a calendar stone from the cave, marked with 52 indicators on the inside of the stone for the weeks, 365 on the outside for days. Despite these findings, the mystery remains. What were the origins of these giants? Where did they come from? One explanation, as offered by Stoker, suggested they were descendants of Egyptians who sailed to America hundreds of years ago. Stoker backed up this by continuing, "Didn't Thor Heyerdahl just prove the possibility that Egyptians may have sailed to America as long as 4,000 years ago on reed rafts? This indeed is the case." Furthermore, giants who colonized Ecuador 4,000 years ago arrived on reed rafts. Also, the Sidiokas sailed on Humboldt Lake in reed canoes they built. Although hundreds of mummies and tons of artifacts have been recovered from the cave, there are a few positive indications of Egyptian influence. However, the giants could easily have retained their cultural heritage and knowledge while their original implements quickly wore out. In explaining the mummies, which should only have been skeletons, anthropologist Robert F. Heiser of the University of Southern California commented, "Conditions of extreme dryness in the cave, as in the pyramids of Egypt, have preserved the archaeological material in remarkable good fashion. In fairness, it should be stated that Mr. Heiser did not infer a connection between Egypt and the Lovelock giants, but only a slight comparison. It seems the mystery of the giants will continue. We may hypothesize that they arrived in the West about 3,000 years ago from either South America or Egypt, and that they were eventually destroyed by Native Americans. Unfortunately, that is all the knowledge we have currently obtained. Perhaps one of America's greatest archaeological mysteries will remain just that, a mystery. Though, fortunately, that uncertainty isn't stopping the continuing search. We are today a largely urban population, whereas our ancestors were country dwellers, many people never travelling far from home throughout the whole of their lives. Today we are a shifting population, moving temporarily or permanently from one area to another without much concern. In the past, the people were rooted in their local environment almost as firmly as the trees in the ground, and it would need a great upheaval to move them away to another district. They also moved around largely on foot, and in that way acquired a far more intimate knowledge of their own locality than we can today, travelling in cars, which effectively cuts us off from the outside world. Every tree, stone, mound, stream, river, pool, hill had its place in their environment, and the most unusual features became the focus of tales explaining how they came to be there. Many standing stones were once given devil names, perhaps at a time when Christianity became the predominant religion and many of the earliest sacred sites came to be regarded as the haunt of the devil. In areas of Scandinavian and Saxon influence, names like Grim, Thor, and Woden were sometimes used, as in Grimes Graves from Norfolk. Most devil sites are in England, particularly the south, with a few in Wales and Scotland, whereas places attributed to giants are largely in the west, with very few in central and eastern England, but many in Cornwall and North Wales. Many standing stones were traditionally attributed to giants, also sizable burial chambers and earthworks which had obviously needed great earth-moving efforts in their construction. The names of a hill fort in Gwynedd translates as the Towns of the Giants, and a passage grave on Anglesey in Gwynedd means the giantess's apronal, referring to her having collected an apronal of stones to build on the mound. The giant's grave in Penrith Churchyard, Cumbria, in reality Tivo corn crosses dating from around 1,000 and some hogback gravestones. In the same churchyard is a wheel-headed cross called the Giant's Thumb. These names are thought to commemorate a 10th century king who became a legendary hero or giant in local lore. Since the 12th century, Stonehenge has also been called the Giant's Dance in some quarters, and the mighty stones of Callanish in the Western Isles were said to be giants turned to stone for refusing to embrace the Christian religion. Ancient sites, usually cairns or barrows, were often believed to be fairy haunts. In Humberside in the UK is a prominent round barrow which housed a fairy dwelling, seen by a drunken villager late one night. He heard people singing and went to see what it was. Through an open door in the side of the mound, he could see people banqueting at large tables. One of the people saw him and offered him a cup. He took it but threw away the contents, not wishing to come under the spell of the fairies, and ran off with the goblet, which was made of an unknown material. This tale was recorded by William of Newburgh in the 12th century. Another tale told of people digging into the mound and finding a golden chest. They tried to pull it out with horses, but it sank back into the mound and no one has been able to recover it. The fairies would sometimes help people by mending broken tools, or would give a reward when helped by humans. In Welsh folklore stories, telling of people who saw the fairies are very common, and some are presented as factual rather than fictional. Indeed, people still claim to see fairies or little people, and these witnesses appear to be neither liars nor insane. Perhaps the little people do still live among us. Famous people, both real and imaginary, were sometimes associated with ancient sites such as a king, King Arthur, and other heroes like Sir Bevis of Hampton in southern England, which has a barrow named after him. Because of their air of mystery, and there being no obvious reason for their construction, prehistoric sites have become a focus for a rich and varied folklore. Standing stones and stone circles were sometimes said to be people's turn to stone, often for dancing on a Sunday, such as the Merry Maidens stone circle in Cornwall, with the Piper's standing stones close by, and the stone circles at Stanton Drew in Avon, or for working in the fields on a Sunday, the Duddow Stones, Northumberland, or for playing the game of hurling on a Sunday, the Hurler Stone circles in Cornwall, and other similar religious transgressions. Some stones were said to move or go to a nearby stream to drink when they heard the clock strike 12 or the cock crow, or sometimes on a special day of the year like the horse stone at Enstone, Oxfordshire, which goes to drink on Midsummer Eve. Some stones were believed to have the power to return if taken away from their rightful place, like a stone on Cefn Carn Carval in Powys, said to bear the hoofmark of King Arthur's horse Cafal, and which would come back of its own accord if carried away. At a number of stone circles, the stones were believed to be unaccountable. This was said of Stonehenge, the Rollright stones Long, Meg and her daughters, the Callanash stones. The same story was told of a few chambered tombs, and when folklorist Leslie Grinsell visited the countless stones near Aylesford in Kent in the late 1940s, he found numbers chalked on the stones showing that the tradition was still alive. Prehistoric stones were often believed to have healing properties, and these sites were regularly visited by the sick, who performed the necessary rituals and thus hoped to be cured. Stonehenge was one such site, as recorded by Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century. For in these stones is a mystery and a healing virtue against many ailments. For they washed the stones and poured the water into baths, whereby those who were sick were cured. Moreover, they mixed confections of herbs with the water, whereby those who were wounded were healed, for not a stone is there that is wanting in virtue or leechcraft. People would crawl through whole stones, like the Menantole in Cornwall, or pass clothing through smaller holes in stones as pregnant women did in Ireland in order to ensure a safe childbirth. At the Tuthy Stane in Argyll, people with toothache would go and knock a nail or screw into one of the stones of this chambered tomb and expect to gain relief from their pain. Such practices may have developed as a result of people's awe at these strange monuments, but there are other customs which strongly suggest that the rituals originally performed at prehistoric sites had been handed down through the generations, although in a greatly degenerate form. On Orkney, sick people would walk around the stones of Stenness 3 times with the sun, Diesel, and similar rituals were practiced elsewhere, for example at Holy Wells, as described in more detail in Ahu v Sacred Waters, and sometimes even at Christian churches. In 1650, the Synod of Argyll was trying to stop people walking sun gates around the church before going in for divine service. Whether or not these customs were derived from prehistoric rituals, it's clear that the people of later centuries were much in awe of the prehistoric remains, so much so that they believed it was dangerous to interfere with them, and this belief may well have helped to preserve them to the present day. Anyone digging in a barrow could expect retribution of some kind, and it often came in the form of a thunderstorm or a ghost or ill health or bad luck thereafter following the offender and his family. In 1859, a farmer on the Isle of Man opened a barrow on his land and then sacrificed a heifer in order to prevent the retribution which he clearly expected. Apart from prehistoric sites, other landscape features were also rich in folklore, such as hills and bridges, and the law even extended offshore, in those areas where the sea has in previous centuries inundated the land. This has happened within living memory at Dunwich on the Suffolk coast, and indeed is still happening. The church bells are said to be heard ringing from time to time from beneath the waves. Off the west and north coasts of Wales are said to be areas where the sea has drowned the land. A fertile stretch of land 40 miles long between the Teifi and Bardsley Island, which was defended by the sea by an embankment and sluices. According to the legend, one night in the 5th century, when the keeper of the embankment was drunk, he left the sluices open and the sea broke through, and only a few inhabitants of these 16 cities survived. When the sea is still, it is said that the remains of buildings can be seen through the clear water, and in rough weather the church bells can be heard. The most famous of these sunken lands is of course Lyonesse, said to have extended west from Cornwall as far as the Scilly Isles. It was drowned by the sea in an immense cataclysm in the distant past, a few projecting rocks being all that can now be seen above the surface. The Cornish coast at Lanks End, there once only lay the note-legendary land of Lyonesse. Could we speculate that there once could have been not just individuals like Goliath in the Bible, but entire races of gigantic people. There are still giants amongst us today, but most suffer from excess growth hormone and tend to be unhealthy and short-lived, but not always. The tallest man on record is Robert Wadlow of the US. He was 8 foot 11 inches tall and lived only 22 years from 1918 to 1940. The tallest woman is in China. She's 8 foot 1 inch. Some giants have been strongly built, even becoming athletes. Many modern basketball players are around 7 feet in height. A French-Canadian strongman and wrestler was 8 foot 3 inches tall, but only lived 23 years from 1881 to 1904. Argentine wrestler Jorge Gonzalez was 7 feet 7 inches tall. The wrestler Andre the Giant was 7 foot 4 inches and weighed 520 pounds. But like most giants, he suffered with his pituitary gland continuing to produce too much growth hormone even in his adult years. This causes the hands, feet and jaw to grow unusually large and causes a variety of health problems. Entire modern tribes and ethnic groups can be extraordinarily short, like the rainforest pygmies of Africa. However, others are unusually tall, like the Watusi tribe of East Africa, where many of the men are up to 7 feet tall. In Europe, the Dutch are tall and unusually well proportioned, and the Montenegrins in the mountainous area of the Balkan Peninsula are taller still, with many men well over 6 feet tall and some over 7 feet, and many women are over 6 feet tall as well. Physical anthropologists have, they believe, identified a species of prehistoric man that they have named Heidelberg man. It has been theorized that some prehistoric human species may simply be different races, but the same species as modern man. To support Neo-Darwinism, as it's known, scientists had to discover supposedly primitive species ancestral to us and related to other primates. Even the anthropologists admit that they can't always be sure if a specimen is Heidelberg man, Homo erectus, or Neanderthal man. Heidelberg people tended to be large and had an average brain size of 1,250 cubic centimeters compared to modern man's 1,400 cubic centimeter average, and most were no taller than modern people. But anthropologists believe that they have identified a South African subgroup with men often over 7 feet tall. So it does seem that actual races of giants have lived in the past. There are also rumors of giant human remains in places as diverse as Sardinia in the Mediterranean and Nan Madol in the Southwest Pacific. However, most of the confirmed specimens come from the Americas. Many of these were found and reported by scientists with good reputations, and others found by laymen and later examined on site by reputable researchers, while others were sent to museums. The number of these remains is staggering. Many of these finds are documented by Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman in Giants on Record. In addition to the skeletons that have been unearthed, early and submodern European explorers reported giants in places like Tierra del Fuego. This is even more mysterious when we remember that, on average, Amerindians, and especially those in Mexico and in Central and South America, tended to be shorter than most Europeans. In North America, there have been a couple of unverified claims of 14-foot skeletons, but most of the giants reported range from around 6 foot 6 to well over 7 feet, with some 8 and 9 footers and a very few of 10 to 12 feet. They have been found everywhere, and many of these were found in the mounds built by several ancient Amerindian civilizations, but most were in the eastern and southeastern United States and along the Mississippi and Ohio river valleys. Vieira and Newman have documented some 1,000 finds in the US and 500 more in other parts of the world. In addition to the finds and the reports of early explorers, many of the Amerindians had legends of giants. The Cherokee, for example, told of peaceful giants who came from somewhere in the west and lived among them for a time. There are also tales from Nevada of red-haired giants whom they wiped out. And there are unverified claims by European settlers in the region of skeletons up to 9.5 feet tall. In 1519, Spanish explorer Alonso Alvarez de Pineda reported entire villages of living giants near the mouth of the Mississippi. Magellan and Sir Francis Drake both reported giants up to 7.5 feet tall in Patagonia. An image of Dr. Frederick Cook in Patagonia in 1897 shows the 5'9" tall explorer flanked by 2 Patagonian men about 6'10" tall. An estimated 7-foot human skeleton was found in Ohio's mysterious Serpent Mound, located in what remains of an ancient asteroid crater. Giant tools and weapons have been found in other Ohio mounds, although skeptics claim that they were merely ceremonial. This may or may not be true, but some of them allegedly show signs of wear, as if they had actually been used by people of great strength. There were also claims of an 11-foot skeleton in Michigan, found in 1894, and a 10-footer in Akron, Ohio in 1899. Elongated skulls were formed in Virginia. In 1937, researchers found a skull with a 2,100 cubic centimeter brain capacity in Virginia. Even the Smithsonian Annual Report of 1873 admitted the discovery of a 36-inch diameter human skull in Illinois. Many of the giant skeletons had unusually thick bones, which, as many have pointed out, would have been necessary for true giants to be strong and healthy. There have also been reports of 7 and 8 foot human skeletons in shell mounds in Florida and on California's Channel Islands and also in Hawaii. Archaeologist Byron Cummings of the University of Arizona reported 7-footers found in Sonora, Mexico in 1934. Some, but not all of the giant skulls had double rows of teeth. It's not hard to figure out that this would confer no benefits, but in fact be a harmful mutation, likely to encourage tooth decay. In 1903, the curator of the Division of Physical Anthropology was a member of the racist eugenics movement, and for years refused to consider that anyone had lived in the Americas before 2000 BP, before the present. To his credit though, he eventually accepted the evidence that Folsom Spear points dated back to 10,000 BC or earlier. Another institution, the Rockefeller Foundation, was involved in archaeological digs and the study of prehistoric people, but its officials admitted that their main goal was to learn how to control people. The same can be said of the Carnegie Institution, controlled by dogmatic proponents of neo-Darwinism. Many have heard the story of geologist Virginia Steen McIntyre, who dared to date Mexican stone tools at 250 to 300,000 BP. Her career was ruined and her conclusions never taken seriously. The University of California at Berkeley tried to stop the broadcasting of the NBC special The Mysterious Origins of Man, and would not allow researcher Michael Cremo to see apparently very ancient artifacts from California, which they kept hidden from the public. But if there were one or more actual races of giants in prehistoric times, where did they come from? Certainly multiple races would likely have originated from multiple points of origin, and since giants seem to have been most numerous in the Americas, it's possible that some of them originated here. But there is something else. Plato never comments on the size or the physical appearance of the Atlanteans. Could at least some of them have been giants? Could Atlantis have been an empire of people living on many islands in and around the Atlantic and Caribbean, as well as some colonies on the mainland of North and South America, and perhaps southwest Spain and parts of North Africa? Were their scattered homelands submerged by the rise in sea levels at the end of the last ice age? In North America, the mound builder cultures seem to have originated near the mouth of the Mississippi and spread northeast and west along that river and its tributaries, mainly the Ohio River. Meanwhile, a somewhat similar culture is now known to have existed in Amazonia and other parts of tropical South America, also building mounds as well as roads and canals. They even traded with the people of Mexico, supplying them with the mica geologists have identified its South American origin used in their pyramids and temples. So could both the mound builder and the Amazonian cultures have come from the Atlantis, with survivors settling the coasts and traveling up the river systems? Could they have been giants? Did they teach the arts of civilization to people already in the Americas and perhaps dominate some tribes? We can speculate, but much remains a mystery. The reason for all this secrecy concerning various giants that once lived on Earth could simply be that it would cause academics to readdress Darwin's theory of evolution and put us back in the questionable corner, where did we come from? After all, there are even debates in regards to how long modern man has actually been around on Earth.
It is easy to talk about the existence of giants and how ancient humanity has created myths around these supposed beings of incredible proportions. But are they pure myth? Interestingly, in many ancient writings, we find that in the distant past, giants were said to walk among people of normal stature. If we look at the ancient writings of South America, North America, Europe and Asia, we will find that ancient cultures mention giants in their respective records. However, some ancient texts not only mention giants, but mention that they were real. But proof of this is necessary, and for some, this proof is the so-called footprint of God. According to some researchers, this imprint belongs to a being of great stature. The imprint was discovered many years ago and has appeared in varying reports of investigators and explorers who claim that this footprint is proof of the existence of giants in our remote past. In early 2012, researcher and explorer Michael Tellinger showed the public what appeared to be a 1.2 metre long footprint, which in his opinion was made by a giant, on a granite rock near Umpuluzu on the Swaziland border to the northeast of South Africa. Tellinger was able to give a more detailed explanation about the mysterious footprint. I would like to share with you what could be one of the best pieces of evidence that prove that once, long ago, there were giants on our planet. Geologists have marvelled at this gigantic footprint, 120 centimetres long, engraved in granite. This is an extremely sacred, mystical and spiritual place for those who preserve African knowledge, and so it must remain. It is known as the footprint of God. This place presents us with a real dilemma and a great mystery that needs to be solved. According to calculations, the footprint would correspond to a person 7.5 metres high, almost 5 times the height of an ordinary person. This, of course, caused great controversy in the scientific community, and the footprint has developed into something of a mystery. For certain experts, the history of our planet is stranger than most people can imagine. For some, the footprint is a simple pattern of natural erosion, but the latest research would suggest that this is unlikely. Professor Peter Wagner of the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, says, "There is a higher probability of little green men arriving from space and licking it out with their tongues than it being created by natural erosion." The mysterious footprint is estimated to be between 200 million and 300 million years old, in accordance with our current understanding of granite formation. This footprint was presented to the public in 2012 on world television, but was apparently discovered in 1912, or 1931 in other accounts, by a farmer named Stoffel Kurtzi, who, while hunting, came across the strange mark. At that time, the place was part of a difficult region of South Africa known as the Eastern Transvaal, full of wildlife, including antelopes, wildebeest and lions. According to Tellinger, the remote location of the footprint reduces the possibility that it has been sculpted by someone. The footprint has not deteriorated too much since the time it was discovered. The possibility that this footprint is a hoax is very small due to its remote location. The pattern that presents erosion within the footprint is very similar to the pattern we find around it. It is hard to imagine that someone thousands of years ago decided to sculpt a giant footprint on a stone, precisely in this place so isolated that even today it is difficult to find. Even today, the area is difficult to find if you don't know its exact location, which is another reason to believe that this cannot be a hoax. Geologically speaking, the area and the rock that contains the footprint can be described as a thick porphyrite granite which has undergone several different stages of cooling. The result is an interesting mixture of large and small granules. This is why construction companies are willing to exploit this area to extract granite, since it is of high quality when polished. If, as Tellinger argues, the erosion pattern inside and outside the footprint is the same, then we can deduce some data. Assuming that the footprint was the work of some counterfeiter, it should have been sculpted long ago, so long that the difference between the erosion of the sculpted part and the unsculpted part is imperceptible. The same would happen if it was actually created by the foot of a giant. But how is it possible that the giant has managed to melt the granite to be able to leave his footprint engraved? Perhaps thousands of years ago, the erosive force of water created a shape similar to that of a footprint, just the outline, and then a group of men decided to use their primitive tools to improve it. They created the divisions of the toes and other details to look like the print of a foot. But why make such a footprint? The answer is elusive because the mind of prehistoric man is a mystery as deep as the footprint itself. Some observers have responded to the theory that it was carved by prehistoric humans perhaps a couple of thousand years ago, arguing that if it was carved into the rock by humans, we should expect to see evidence of chisel marks, sharp edges, and file impressions. There are no such marks. But the fact that there are no signs of human agency leads to the conclusion that it was caused by other means. But what? Renowned Austrian researcher Klaus Dohner, famous for claiming that a race of giants inhabited the Earth thousands of years ago, visited the print along with Michael Tellinger in January 2012. According to him, the print is a true footprint of a huge human being. This connects with bones allegedly found in Ecuador that supposedly belong to giants of the same height, 7.5 meters. In April 2005, researcher and investigator David Icke and the famous African shaman Credo Mutwa visited the giant footprint. Mutwa could not climb to the stone that contains the footprint due to his advanced age and his state of health, but claimed that the footprint is the most sacred place in South Africa and should be protected by the South African government. He also told those present that the footprint belonged to the left foot of a woman, and that the right foot of this woman is engraved on another stone in Sri Lanka. Mutwa said that the footprint of Sri Lanka was known as the footprint of Athens, and that both footprints were made by female giants. However, there is no such footprint in Sri Lanka. Perhaps Credo Mutwa was referring to the famous giant Buddha footprints found in several countries in Asia. For some people, this print is evidence of the existence of the giant sons of God, Nephilim, mentioned in the Bible and in other writings, but others believe that it belongs to the sons of Seth, angels, aliens, monsters, and strange hybrid offspring that were killed in the great universal flood. In almost all mythologies, there are many legends about the relationships between gods and mortal women, and between goddesses and mortal men, producing demigods, titans, or heroes. There is also a common mythology that describes how once there was a race of men of gigantic stature. Who were these Nephilim? The writings indicate that they are the descendants of bad alliances between divine beings and the daughters of men. The line, "There were giants on earth in those days," would mean the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men. However, it is possible that the Nephilim existed separately from mixed marriages, and the term "they were on earth in those days" simply establishes the antediluvian time frame. The granite outcropping in which the footprint appears is part of the rock unit known to geologists as the Umpuluzi batholith. A batholith is a large body of igneous rock that forms deep in the Earth's crust. The Umpuluzi batholith has been studied extensively and, based on isotope analysis, this granite dates back an astonishing 3,100 million years. The Earth was a very different place back then. The atmosphere lacked free oxygen. The highest life forms that we know of from that early period were microbes, which in some cases formed photosynthetic bacterial layers or mats. How could living beings of this size and complexity have existed so long ago? So the possibility of giants on Earth back then is practically zero. There is no evidence at all for their existence. That is, unless you accept the single giant footprint found in the Umpuluzi batholith as evidence, which some still do, despite scientific arguments to the contrary. But even Michael Tellinger admitted that he would be hard-pressed to explain how a giant could be striding through molten granite several kilometres below the surface millions of years ago. The footprint is in a vertical granite outcrop, which in order to have acquired that position should have been pushed up by tectonic movements. But the rocky mass of granite on which the print is engraved has no indication of having been displaced upwards, since it has no signs of metamorphism, that is, recrystallization of the pre-existing rock caused by heat and or pressure. Granite that has undergone metamorphism should show bands or layers. Going by geologists' estimation of the age of the rock formation, the footprint could be about 3.1 billion years old. It has proved a brain teaser for geologists who have struggled to explain it convincingly, but for locals the explanation is simple. It is the footprint left behind by a supernatural being in the distant mythical past. Is the footprint of God the result of natural forces, a hoax or proof of ancient giants? Both believers and detractors have evidence they believe in, but only detailed study of the rock and footprint will lead us to the truth.